Hello, I'm Stephen Wynn, arts writer and critic in San Francisco. We're here today to speak to the four leading candidates for mayor about the arts: Angela Alioto, London Breed, Jane Kim, and Mark Leno. We're going to speak to them first about their own experience of the arts, what has been important and inspiring to them. Then we'll move on to talk about how the arts can be supported and nurtured in San Francisco, how they are to be funded, and finally what the role of the public schools in the arts are. London Breed, thank you so much for coming to talk to us about the arts today.
Of course.
Yes. Let's start with sort of the personal side of your own experience of something you've seen recently in the theater, music, a poem, a book, something that meant something to you and that kind of captures your sense of what's important about the arts.
Well, I actually saw the play Hamilton here in San Francisco. Oh my goodness, one of the most amazing performances I've seen in so long. I come from the arts community. I ran an arts organization,
I know that. Yes, indeed.
the African American Art and Culture Complex for 10 years. The arts just really fascinate me. It comes alive in the people who perform, who produce, who make San Francisco, I believe, one of the most incredible places here. So I just, everything about the arts, whether it's literature, whether it's performing arts, whether it's music, what have you, it's something that's really near and dear to my heart.
What was it about Hamilton specifically that really kind of got to you and that proved moving and motivating and inspiring to you?
I think it told an amazing story, and also it included politics. It included intrigue, the dancing, the singing, how it came together, the movement, the structure, the scene that rewind a scene. I mean, just how it was put together. It was so fascinating to watch. You couldn't turn your head for a moment. You wanted to see every single thing that happened in the process. And so I think all of it combined made for an incredible performance.
Let's touch on your own experience as an arts administrator for a decade, as you said. How does that play into your, into your candidacy and the way that you think about the arts specifically?
Well, I basically ran for supervisor during the time that I served as the executive director of the African American Art and Culture Complex. And the reason why I ran is because I wanted to make sure that the funding and the policies and how we make decisions in San Francisco actually impacts the community better, specifically with the arts and what we were doing to use the arts to transform lives in the community, in the Western Addition community. And so part of what I did when I first became a member was make sure that we protected the arts when we had some challenges with our hotel tax legislation where funding was looking to be cut. And I made sure that we not only didn't cut the funding, but we increased it. And we started thinking about community arts organizations differently and how we play a role in providing them support. In fact, I helped to fund a grant writer for my arts organizations. Not only do they help to write these grants for obtaining financial support for small institutions with the city, but they also administer the grants. I did this at the African American Art and Culture Complex, especially because we had the most talented people who basically didn't have time for paperwork, didn't have time to basically administer a grant, and sometimes would forget deadlines and lose funding as a result of that. So as mayor, I want to make sure that we're doing a better job to provide the resources, to make sure the arts are protected, and to make sure we're providing the infrastructure necessary to support the arts long-term, whether it's a small or large institution.
Yes, well, you're raising that issue, and historically, as you know, there's been this issue about the large institutions and the mid-sized and the cultural centers and the kind of organization that you ran. That has become, even, you know well from the ground up how difficult it is to make those things work and to balance those considerations. How do you think, sort of in broad terms, especially in the economic divisive times that we have now, all the challenges the city has, in a broad way, how can the city support the arts and nurture it and make the arts thrive?
So part of one of my dreams is to really work on making sure that the larger institutions are consistently working and actively engaged with the smaller institutions. I mean, part of the new generation of artists comes from the smaller institutions, and how do we open the doors of opportunity with the ballet, with the symphony, if it not for the relationships that exist between the smaller institutions. I mean, in fact, at the African American Art and Culture Complex, we would work with the ballet, we would work with the opera, we would expose young people to these opportunities so that they know if they decided to nurture their talent, they could do anything that they want in the arts. And I think it's an important thing to do as mayor is to nurture those relationships, to continue to bridge the gap and bring them together. The Arts Alliance is a perfect example of bridging that gap and coming together and talking about ways in which we can continue to grow financially support for the arts and have, a thriving arts community on all levels. And I think, as mayor, I will definitely be at the forefront of continuing to foster those relationships.
How does some of the arts issues that we're talking about play into some of the other issues that are going on in the city that are so prominent in people's minds? The cost of housing, traffic, transportation, the quality of our street life. How do those things become part of a complex in which the arts plays a role in that and is important and central to some of these other issues?
I think when you look at what we've experienced in San Francisco in terms of our housing crises and in terms of our decline in diversity and diversity, racial diversity, economic diversity, diversity in the arts, and the ability to find and locate artists locally that can participate in many of these arts projects that are funded through the city and other projects in San Francisco. I think the fact that we are having some challenges in the city means that we have to do a better job of making sure that arts are at the forefront of how we do business in San Francisco, more specifically how we provide housing to artists. And in fact, and I know I keep going back to the African American Art and Culture Complex, but when I was the director there, my dream was to build artist housing on that parking lot where it's a live-work kind of situation. We have examples of how that works at the old Goodman Building and places in San Francisco where you can create these incredible arts communities for the purpose of making sure that we maintain the diversity in the arts community in San Francisco. The Hunters Point Shipyard is another great example of bringing artists together with opportunity for the purposes of making sure they have a space. And part of having a great artist community is making sure that sometimes we are subsidizing those costs and we're working together to retain what we have. And it will take a lot of work and creativity, but I know that it's possible if we make the right decisions. And part of those decisions is really focusing on housing for artists and making sure that, for example, some of the challenges we've had in the past is really earmarking housing specifically for artists because of a lot of our housing laws, which means that most of the money would need to be raised privately for the purpose of protecting it as an artist community. And that does take a lot of work, but it's not impossible.
If you were to become mayor, what specific kind of initiatives might you pursue, or might you along these lines, or perhaps in other areas as well?
So I think some of the things I might pursue is specifically identifying locations that are underutilized sites where there is an opportunity to build housing and also privately fundraise for the purpose of building that housing. The other thing that I would do is make sure that we're increasing funding in our cultural equity grants because we also are discovering that there is somewhat of a lack of diversity in the distribution of grant funding in San Francisco, and I do think that when you look at how much money we pour into cultural equity grants, we need to increase the funding there, but more importantly, we need to make sure that there's an administrator that is working with our small institutions for the purposes of making sure that they're able to get grants, they're able to comply, and they have the support and resources necessary to comply with what the city requires, but at the same time producing the incredible magic that they do for us every day.
You've alluded to really public-private partnerships here several times now. I wonder how you make the argument broadly for those kind of partnerships, and really even more broadly than that, how you make the case that the arts are important, again, with all these other issues sort of contain. In other words, is this a zero-sum game where if you're putting money into things like homelessness or drug issues or traffic or public transit, does that necessarily take money away from the arts? How do you balance those kind of fiscal concerns and make the case that the arts really are important in a broader way, and that they're really an engine in some ways in the city.
And from my perspective, there is no trade-off. There is no this versus that or don't. I mean, here in the city, for example, between 2010 and 2015, for every 8 jobs we created 1 unit of housing. And we wonder why there's a housing crisis. And I think that when we talk about San Francisco and its diversity and its need to address issues around homelessness and housing and public safety and transportation, the arts fits right into all of those things. The arts changes lives. I mean, for example, I played in band in middle school. Now, if you didn't play in band, you weren't cool. And I wasn't, the most best behaving child, I admit it, but the first day that I was in band and I was talking too much, Mr. Martins, who was a band instructor, basically made me write lines. And he told me if I do anything wrong again, I won't be in band. I straightened up real fast because I didn't want to miss out on this opportunity. And I think, that really changed my life. And so part of, when we're looking at what we need to do in San Francisco as it relates to the arts, it's just a natural part of what we should be doing in our public schools, in our lives, in our city, for the purposes of producing, what we know is great. Not just what we see in terms of murals all over the city, which are incredible and make you smile, but also the next generation of artists, the artists who actually oftentimes get overlooked, making sure that they have a platform and opportunity. It's naturally who they are, and I think as a city, we will miss out on this incredible talent if we don't support it and nurture it.
I mean, you raise an interesting point, which is that the arts, among the other things that they do, is there's a kind of discipline. There's a kind of rigor of learning an instrument or learning your craft, whether it's visual art or dance or whatever's going on. It's important, isn't it?
Yeah, it's discipline. It also helps young people to work together. It builds self-esteem. I mean, I watched as kids who wouldn't even look me directly in the eye turn into these superstars on stage when they performed. And what it's done to watch kids grow and blossom in something that they truly love and believe in, it is one of the most amazing things. And it also improves grades for kids who are actively engaged in the arts. It is something that we need to make sure that is really at the forefront of what we do in San Francisco, for sure.
Are there ways in which you can bring some of these values that the arts has, the discipline and the excitement and the sense of discovery, into a mayoral administration? Are there analogies between the arts and government, do you think?
Oh, always, because, for example, we had an exhibit, a Paul Robeson exhibit at the African American Art and Culture Complex called Revolutionary Artist. I mean, we're talking about a man who stood up to the powers that be, who was an incredible artist, who was an incredible singer, just talking about his journey and how, he was basically blacklisted and how he was treated throughout the course of his career, but he used his star power in the arts as a way to fight against injustice. And so arts definitely plays a role, in telling a story and being actively engaged in the world of politics. But, for example, as supervisor, I brought in the arts to our location, whether into my office. We have exhibits by a number of our artists in our community. We sell their art, and they get 100% of the proceeds, which I really care. We got to pay our artists too. But I just think that there's always a role. Anytime, for example, even a mayor is sworn in, they're looking for a great singer to sing the national anthem or great performances. Our choir, the girls' chorus, the boys' chorus, the gay men's chorus, all these great things are always sought after by people for so many incredible events. And so they don't just wake up one day and go out someplace and they're able to sing. They have to practice, they have to rehearse, they have to be disciplined. And there's just a lot of work that goes into that and a lot of support necessary to continue to keep that going. And so I think part of how that relates to politics, in order to produce good legislation, in order to produce good things for the city and county of San Francisco, there's a lot of work that goes into doing that as well, and hopefully doing something just as creative as we're able to do in the arts when it comes to producing the right kind of legislation for the purpose of addressing issues in our city.
Yeah, before we turn to the hotel tax fund, I wonder if you have other kind of specific proposals or ideas about how the arts might be promoted, or how you might continue to make San Francisco enhance or really embrace the idea of San Francisco as an iconic arts city. So much of what we hear about San Francisco nationally, internationally, is sort of furrowed brow, like what's happened to San Francisco?
Yeah.
How can the arts kind of be an emblem on the other side of that coin and indeed play into that?
So I think part of how the arts play a role is, for example, we're pushing in the Western Addition in the Fillmore community. We actually passed one of the first cultural districts in Japantown. Japantown is an incredible, iconic place in our city, a beautiful place that arts plays a role and is important in the performance with the festivals and all the things that occur there. And I think when we basically talk about visiting San Francisco and getting people to look at it as an arts destination, really taking what we do here and the different places that make us unique and talking about the history and the culture, but arts and our murals and our performances play an important part of that. To visit San Francisco to see an amazing performance like Hamilton, or to come and see the Nutcracker during the holiday season and those kinds of things. I think that it's important to promote them, through SF Travel, and as a place that you would come and visit for San Francisco, because the first thing you do when you go to other places, you're looking for where you can see a great show or how you can, see some kind of performance. And that is really what I think makes San Francisco a unique place, because we offer it all, from the small institutions at, Brava Theater or the Mission Latino Cultural Center and all these places where on any given day you can see a local great performance, to a larger institution like the opera or the symphony or anything like that. We have a unique city with unique spaces for the purposes of attracting people from all over the world.
Yeah, I mean, one of the surprising things that I've learned over the years, and you know this as well, that San Francisco is not just a place that people happen to go to a show here. It's really a destination for the arts also. Our museums, the public performances, and as you say, the groups large and small, that tourism is really important. I mean, tourism and the arts are intricately linked together, and they really are a driver of economic well-being as well. And again, if there are other ways that you can think that that you might propose to enhance that relationship, particularly with the out of town or the out of city visitor. We often think the arts are, indigenous, endogenous to San Francisco, but in fact, it's drawing people from all over the world, really.
All over the world, but also all over the Bay Area. I mean, at SOMARTS, where they had this incredible art exhibit called "The Black Woman is God," people came from everywhere, all over the Bay Area, thousands of people to see what this thing was all about. Incredible African American women who are incredible artists producing such an amazing show. One night, everyone came dressed in white, and to hear the music and to see the procession and to feel the energy and the love in the room, and how it just really made it clear that there's some kind of different energy right here at SOMARTS, this community art space with all these incredible women. I mean, it was transformative. And I think that what we can do as a city is making sure that we shine a light on both the large and small and medium-sized institutions, and these unique shows in neighborhoods can also play an important role in that.
Yeah. Let's turn to the Hotel Tax Fund. Supervisors Peskin and Tang have proposed a ballot measure for the fall that would reestablish the historic connection of hotel tax funding to the arts. Are you in favor of that proposal?
Reestablish, you mean like, can you explain?
Well, that over the years, the funding, historically the hotel tax fund money went directly to the arts and was specifically targeted for that. That has since been changed, and now there's a proposal by Peskin and Tang to reassert that, and indeed to bring the funding level back to where it was at $16.3 million in 2003.
So I think that might be somewhat confusing, because, I mean, just so you know, as the director of the African American Art and Culture Complex, I was a beneficiary of hotel tax revenue for the purposes of running an incredible 34,000 square foot arts facility. When I first got on the Board of Supervisors, what we discovered is the hotel tax legislation that had originally passed, it was amended by ordinance at the Board of Supervisors, and technically under law, that wasn't necessarily possible, and we discovered years later that that was problematic. But I want to be clear that I made sure not only did we maintain in our budget the same level that exists for all of our arts institutions. That particular year when we discovered that error that occurred, I got the mayor to increase arts funding across the board by 5%. And it was absolutely amazing. But I do think it's important for the long-term stability of the arts to protect the arts funding, because right now it's not necessarily completely protected. Anybody who becomes mayor who wants to make changes could make changes to that funding.
Because of the way the ordinance is written.
Well, the ordinance technically by law couldn't, it would have to go, because it went to voters in the first place, it would have to go back to the voters. So there were mistakes made by the Board of Supervisors, and
that's what the Peskin and Tang measure is attempting to do. Are you in favor of that?
If it's attempting to make sure that the funding, the level of funding according to what was intended under the ordinance.
Originally,
if that's what it's intended to do, but I haven't had a chance to review it. If that's what it's intended to do, then yes, of course, I would be very supportive of that, and in fact would want to not only co-sponsor it, but also help to campaign for it.
Let's turn to the schools. I know the San Francisco Unified School District is a different dominion than the city has, but the arts in the schools is terribly important. It's withered not just here, but everywhere in the country. What used to be central to school curriculums has now become often marginal if it's there at all. What's the importance, do you think, of the arts in the schools, and what can the city do to promote that?
I think that the arts in the schools is extremely important. Arts, sports, all the different extracurricular activities that play a role in growth and development and a diverse curriculum. And as I said, if it weren't for band, and when I was in middle school, where it could be quite a challenging time in a child's life, I don't know what I would have done. And my teacher was incredible, and everybody loved Mr. Martins. He was the person, even when you misbehaved in other classes, everyone would ask Mr. Martins to talk to you, and you didn't want that conversation because the possibility of getting put out of band was there, so you didn't want to get put out of band, and so it really can help with disciplinary issues as well as getting kids inspired to participate in making music happen. I mean, we were playing scales the first time we learned to play scales. We worked independently, and then when we came together, and to be in that particular environment and make magic happen with a group of instruments in that way, that was like one of my first most amazing experiences as a child. Coming from an environment of drugs, of violence, of hopelessness, of frustration, here we had something that, magic would happen. And the other thing was, we would need to take our instruments home to rehearse. And I just couldn't believe that they were letting me take a French horn home, because it involved trust. I trust you to bring this instrument back. I trust you to practice and rehearse on your own to get better. So it's like all these different dynamics play a role in a child's life, in their development, in their growth, and in their desire to be a part of something that sometimes, is just a way in which they can get actively engaged in making some magic happen. And so I just think that, we have to do a better job here in our city with making access to arts, not only, in our public schools, but also making sure there's a connection with larger institutions in San Francisco. Not just watching performances, but being a part of performances. When I was in band, we played at Davies Symphony Hall. And that was the first time I ever stepped foot in Davies Symphony Hall. I didn't even know what it was. But because of band, the opportunity exists.
It got you in that door.
Yeah, it got me in City Hall. We played for Mayor Dianne Feinstein. We were her band. She bought us band sweaters, and we thought we were just, the cream of the crop. And it just does so much for a young person. And I just think that it's important that we continue to do a better job of opening those doors and the opportunities for young people to participate in the arts, not just in our public schools, but also in many of our nonprofit agencies all over the city that provide those opportunities.
All right. Studies show, I'm sure you know, that the arts feeds performance in things like science and math and writing and other disciplines. Is that, again, something, given that it's not just arguing that the arts are a nice thing for students to have, a nice rounding thing, but are really central? Is that something that you as a mayor can drive that argument somewhat in terms of what the public schools can do, what we can do for kids with the arts in the city?
What I notice in working with kids at an arts organization is just sometimes there are children who are just artists. That's just what they are. That's just who they are. I grew up with a guy named Robert Henry Johnson. Robert has always been a dancer my whole life. He walks like a dancer. He looks like a dancer. He's a dancer.
You know it when you were kids together, huh?
Yes.
Yeah.
You just know it. It's just the way that he walks. walks and the way that he moves. And he is not only an incredible dancer, he's an incredible choreographer. He writes plays, he's inspirational, and that's just naturally who he has always been. And I think part of, what's important for someone who's mayor or who's a leader of the city is to understand the role that everyone plays in making San Francisco a better place. Sometimes, that is who people are, and we have to make sure we nurture that, we support that, we encourage that. And I think that that's really what I bring to the table, just understanding that as someone who's worked in the arts community for so very long, just the ability to identify certain people or certain things that are necessary for just enhancing what already, enhancing the arts in San Francisco. I mean, I will continue to make sure that I'm a major supporter, no matter whether I'm mayor or anything else in San Francisco, because it's just something that I absolutely love. I love the fact that we have performances in City Hall, random performances on Fridays with dancers and folks, and they don't just show up and dance, they rehearse, they take time. This is what they do. And again, I truly believe artists should be paid for the work that they do. It is just like someone's being paid to be an HR person or anything else in life. I truly believe that all of these things, play a vital role in the diversity and the success of San Francisco. Not just something you see on the side, but something that needs to be naturally embedded in the fabric of San Francisco.
Yeah, listening to you talk about learning to play scales together and rehearsing, it's what people in government need to do too, isn't it? That's what a mayor needs to do, is to get people to play the scales together sometime, because we often seem to be playing different tunes to each other.
Yeah, we are. And politics is one thing, but the work is another thing. Actually, the work, doing and getting people to come together for the greater good is something that I've been good at on the Board of Supervisors with policy decisions. So, for example, we see the politics and that kind of becomes the big story in terms of decisions that get made that are politically motivated, but ultimately, what I care about is the ability to change our laws. For example, our inclusionary housing law. I had 6 votes to get that through the Board of Supervisors, but I refused to do it without an 11-0 vote because I wanted to make sure it was strong legislation. We brought all the parties to the table and we worked together because this was too important for the people of San Francisco to basically just roll over everyone else in order to get something passed. I don't think that's responsible legislating, and the people of San Francisco deserve better. And part of it is we need to work together on some of those really challenging issues, like the hotel tax, like increasing funding for the arts and some of the things that I've worked with my colleagues with over the years.
Do you think it would be an important message on the hotel tax measure, for example, to have that pass with a unanimous vote? I mean, is that important too?
I think it's important, and I think it's possible because, again, we have, basically, I know I have been a strong supporter and protector of the existing arts funding in addition to an increase. And so that it could change with any person who's mayor. And I want to make sure that it's protected because I come from that world where I counted on hotel tax money for the purposes of running a 34,000 arts facility in the heart of the Western Addition community during a time where we were dealing with some of the most challenging situations around gun violence and other issues. I mean, it was incredible. And just imagine if I had lost that funding at that time, what I wouldn't have been able to do to support the community. It's too important. And so whatever we need to do to protect it, I'm sure, as the president of the board or as the mayor, I'm sure that I could work with all of the Board of Supervisors members to come to an agreement that we could put on the ballot for the purposes of protecting it for generations to come.
Because when an institution goes away, it doesn't come back easily, does it?
It does not. And I went to the African American Art and Culture Complex when it was in trouble. And we almost lost it. And funding was taken away. And it was falling apart. And now it's just really an incredible institution. I grew up going to this place as a kid. It was a getaway. And so now it's still that for the community. And it is that because of its funding. It's consistent funding that makes it possible.
Great. Well, absent your French horn, I'm going to just thank you, and you could send us out with a song if you brought your horn.
You don't want to hear me sing. This is why I support real artists.
Thank you, London Breed, for talking to us.
Thank you.
Pleasure.